Madam President,
Senator from Maryland.
I'd ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, my highest priority is America's security. So let me share with my colleagues how the climate change summit that's taking place in Paris affects global and U.S. security. Climate change is a global problem, and global problems require global solutions. As negotiators for over 180 nations gather in Paris, I think it's important that the Senate take note of this historic moment when all countries, developed and developing, are finally coming together to tackle the global threat of climate change. The achievement of a new international agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris is our chance to ensure the future generations have the opportunity to enjoy a safer, healthier, and more prosperous world. Time is running out for us to act. As world leaders gather to find cooperative solutions to combating climate change, I'm reminded of the message of Pope Francis' climate change encyclical and the environmental crisis facing our planet. So let me quote from Pope Francis when he said, "The urgent challenge to protect our common home includes a concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable, integral development, for we know that these things can change. I urgently appeal for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all. Climate change is a global problem with grave implications: environmental, social, economic, political, and for the distribution of goods. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day." Pope Francis is correct. World leaders are heeding the Holy See's call for collective actions. And for the first time in history, we are on the cusp of reaching an agreement where all countries will commit to doing their fair share to lower greenhouse gases. 187 nations, representing 97% of the global carbon emitters, have already submitted plans to lower or limit their carbon pollution. U.S. diplomatic leadership helped spur countries like China, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and others, some of which were previously reluctant to pledge any action on reducing emissions, to make serious commitments to curb greenhouse gas pollution. And to underscore these commitments, some developing countries are also contributing to the International Climate Finance Mechanism that will help the world's most vulnerable populations adapt to the world's worst impacts of climate change. China alone has pledged more than $3 billion to this effort. Now that the United States has finally persuaded the broadest possible group of countries to take actions against climate change, it is no longer true to argue that the United States shouldn't reduce its emissions because developing countries refuse to follow suit. We have gotten them all to act. Paris is the best chance we have of forging an agreement where all countries pledge to lower their carbon emissions. U.S. leadership brought us to where we are today. And now the United States must seize the opportunity for a truly global agreement to address climate change. The U.S. voluntarily submitted its carbon reduction goals very early in the process. Our deliberative early action, which included an explanation of the national policies that will result in the achievement of our emission reduction goals, spurred more than 180 countries to do the same. China, for example, committed to lower its carbon emissions per unit of GDP by 60 to 65% below 2005 levels, and increase renewable energy to account for 20% of its electricity generation by 2030. This will require China to build an additional 800 to 1,000 GW of non-fossil electric generation, which is close to the entire installed capacity of all power plants in the United States. The global outpouring of support for cooperation is a true testament to the strength of U.S. global leadership on climate change. Optimism and global cooperation in this effort are at an all-time high, and that is largely due to constructive U.S. engagement. If we want to lock in this progress, we must support a strong and ambitious agreement in Paris. Now, these initial pledges will not put an end to global warming, but they are strong first steps that set international community on a path to limit the rise of temperature by 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. Continuing on our current trajectory would result in a projected warming of 3.6 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. But with the pledges currently on the table in Paris, we can lower that to 2.7 degrees, more than halfway to the 2-degree goal. More importantly, however, these Paris pledges are only the first wave of action. Actions coming out of Paris will give us the lasting framework whereby countries can update their pledges over time to ensure that they meet their global goal of 2 degrees Celsius. And by implementing their initial commitments and making further investments in clean energy, cheaper renewable fuels will allow for even more ambitious carbon reductions in the future. The Paris Agreement alone will not end the threat of climate change, but is a solid first step, one that includes countries at every stage of economic development. The private sector has also come through to voice its support for this ambitious agreement in Paris. Already, 154 U.S. companies representing $4.2 trillion in annual revenues, operating in all 50 states and employing 11 million Americans, have signed the American Business Act on climate change and are voicing their support for a positive outcome in Paris. It's not just governments, it's also the private sector, which we desperately need for Paris to be successful. The Paris Agreement will help send a strong market signal for clean, renewable energy worldwide, and that long-term certainty is exactly what investors need. If we don't embrace the clean energy revolution that the world is poised to leap forward into, then our competitors will. And it will be the doubters and the deniers who will be blamed for the United States' descent from a global leader in clean energy technology innovation. U.S. deployment of clean energy and technologies has grown exponentially in recent years. Renewable energy generation has experienced the fastest growth of all generation sectors. Since 2008, the cost of clean energy technologies has dropped dramatically, fostering this growth. For example, in wind energy, as of 2014, there will be more than 65,000 megawatts of utility-scale wind power deployed across 39 states, enough to generate electricity for more than 16 million households. In solar energy, by 2014, the total capacity of the utility-scale solar PV reached 9.7 GWs, with 99% of these installations occurring after 2008. This trend has continued, with 15% of all electric generation capacity brought online from January to September 2015, arising from the utility-scale PV. There is almost a limitless growth of potential in clean energy. The U.S. has traditionally led the world in energy technology development for more than a century. U.S. energy innovations brought power and light to the world, and that continued spirit of leadership is powering the global clean energy revolution. Strong outcomes in the international agreement that is coming together here at COP21 Paris will be a catalyst in the clean energy revolution. The world is looking to the United States for continued leadership. This week's announcement of the new Mission Innovation Initiative, led by the United States Department of Energy, Secretary Moniz, that includes 19 other nations, and a gleaming example of U.S. clean energy diplomacy, sending yet another strong signal of U.S. cooperation and commitment to growing jobs and investments opportunities in the U.S., while providing global clean energy solutions that will allow developing countries to bypass cheap and dirty power and thrive through deployment of affordable clean energy solutions. It'll be U.S. technology helping the global community produce energy in a more cost-effective way and in a cleaner way, creating more jobs in the United States. Madam President, climate change affects us all. The people of Maryland understand this. For those who live on Smith Island in the Chesapeake Bay, who are seeing their island disappear, to the more frequent storms that we are experiencing, to the health of the Chesapeake Bay. But it's also a world stability issue. Climate refugees are a real concern for regional security and U.S. security. So this is a national security imperative. The solution is COP21, Paris. 2% Celsius goal will dramatically improve the environmental health of the planet, helping us with our national security. Energy security, because we have renewables. It's a lot easier to get to, and it's more plentiful than the fossil fuels. That helps energy security, no longer dependent upon circumstances in other parts of the world. And yes, we will also create more jobs, particularly by the use of U.S. innovation. The Paris Agreement will serve as an important role in transitioning the world towards a more renewable energy, which will serve as a source of American job growth and innovation and to put America back in control of our own energy future. Paris is our best opportunity to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. We need an agreement to ensure that all countries do their fair share to address this problem and to lock in years of U.S. leadership. We need an agreement to maintain the clean energy revolution that is so critical to job creation here at home and protecting our nation's energy security. But most importantly, we need an agreement to make sure that we avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change that threaten the rights of our children and our grandchildren to pursue a healthy, safe, and prosperous life. I thank my colleagues for their indulgence, and with that, I would yield the floor.